In this lesson, we'll be implementing the publicly and privately accessible GraphQL API within our Nuxt project that we created in the last lesson. So to get started, let's create an Api Vox module, and we'll use this module to do all of the communication with our API. So let's go ahead and dive into our store and create a module called api.js. Within the store, we're going to need to import a couple of dependencies. So let's import API from AWS Amplify. Let's import all of our queries as GQL queries from source GraphQL queries. And then let's also import all of our mutations as GQL mutations from source GraphQL mutations. So these are going to be all of the queries and all of the mutations that were generated for us whenever we created our API in the last lesson. Next up, let's go ahead and just stub our state. So export const state, and we're going to start that off as an empty object. We're going to have a single getter. So let's export const getters, and this is going to be called auth mode. And we need to get to the root state. So let's do state getters root state, and then we can use that root state to get into our auth module to determine whether or not a user is authenticated. And if a user is authenticated, we can return back Amazon Cognito user pools. If they're not authenticated, we will return back API key. So later on, whenever we actually send on an API call, we're going to use this auth module getter to determine whether the API call should use Cognito user pools or API key as its authorization method. Okay, now we're going to have a single mutation as well. So export const mutations. We're just going to call this set. It's going to be a universal setter. So we're going to accept in a state, and we're going to accept a key value pair to set that state. On the state, we're going to set whatever key we pass in as the value we pass in. And then for right now, let's go ahead and wrap this file up with 3 actions. These 3 actions are going to serve as a middleman to keep things dry within our code base. So if we were to repeat these steps for each individual API call, as our API grows, it's going to get pretty massive. So let's keep things kind of concise by adding in these helpers. So let's do export const actions. We're going to have one called get, and this will take in commit and getters, and it will accept an object of key, query, and ID. And then let's actually make our API call. So let's extract data from the response of that and await. Then let's use that API package we imported from AWS Amplify to run api.graphql. That accepts an object with a query, and then we can use the query from our GQL queries. So GQL queries, and then we'll pass in the query name that we actually want to run. So this query here is going to be a string of a name of a query within that source GraphQL queries file. So for example, list users. As I noted in the last lesson, you can also define your own query here as well. You don't need to use one of the generated ones. We'll also need to pass in variables of the ID of the field we want to get back. And then we need to define which auth mode to use, and we can use that getter for that here. So getters auth mode. Okay, and then whenever Amplify returns back the result of our API call, it's going to return back response.data. And then the actual data that we want to get is going to be inside of data.whatever query name we actually ran. So it's going to be the same as query here. So to extract that value out, we can do const value equals data query. Okay, and we can also accept a key here, and we're going to make that optional. So if we provide a key, then we want to save whatever result value we get back from our API call into our Vuex state. So to do that, we're going to use our set mutation to set the key value pair. So this key will be the key of whatever state object we want to mutate. So let's do if key commit set, and then we could just do key and value. And then we'll also return that value back as well. And then the other 2 actions we'll be creating are going to be relatively similar to our get. So let's just copy and paste that 2 times. Let's change the first to query and the second to mutate. Our query, instead of accepting an ID, will accept some filters, and we can change that within the variables as well. And since the results of our query action are going to return arrays of items, we need to nest one step deeper within our data query to also include items. And we can see that if we dive into source GraphQL queries, anytime that we're doing a list call, we also have an items array within that list containing each of the items. So that is specific to our query. Okay, and that wraps up the query. So let's move down to mutate. So instead of query here, we're going to do mutation And instead of ID, this will be input. Okay, and then this input's going to be an object of fields. Whenever we're creating, it's going to be all of the fields we want to create our record with. Whenever we're updating, it's all the fields we want to change our record with. And whenever we're deleting, it's the ID of the record. We'll also want to change our GQL queries to GQL mutations. We'll change this query to mutation. We'll change this query to mutation. This query, however, remains the same. And then we want to change our variables from ID to input. And that should do it for mutate. So let's go ahead and save that. Okay, so next up, let's create a store to manage our user's profile. So let's go ahead and do store, create new, and let's just call this user.js. Now, if you wanted to, you could also use the auth store for this, or you could name this store profile, whatever your preference is. So for this module, we're not going to need to import any dependencies, and our state and mutations are going to start off pretty typical. So let's do export const state, and we're just going to have a user defaulted to null. And then for our mutations, let's do export const mutations, and we're just going to do set user state user state.user equals user. Okay, and then next up, we're going to need to create 3 actions. Let's export const actions. Okay, so first up, we're going to need to be able to get a user. So let's do async get user, and let's accept commit and dispatch for that. And then we'll pass in an ID to get the user by. Okay, and then for this, we can actually use our API get action to actually communicate with our API. So let's do export const user equals await dispatch API get. And then the query we're going to run is called get user. And we'll need to pass in the ID as the ID for that. And then since we're using the module pattern, we're going to need to tell Vuex to run this across all modules. So let's do root true. And then finally, let's commit set user, whatever user we get back, and return that user as well. All right, next up, let's do create user, and we'll need commit and dispatch for this as well. And then for this, we'll accept an input. Let's do const user await dispatch. This time we'll call API mutate, and we'll run the mutation create user, and we'll pass that in the input, and then we'll tell Vuex to run this across all modules. And then again, let's set the user that we get back and return the user. And it looks like Visual Studio Code actually tried to import those from the queries themselves. So we want to run those off of our API. Lastly, we're going to want to create an action to find or create a user profile. So let's do find or create. This will need dispatch, and then this will accept attributes and a username within an object. Okay, so first up, let's try to find user. So const user equals await dispatch, and we'll use our get user action from this module. And we'll pass in the username as the ID, because in this project, the way that we have it set up, our profile user ID is also going to be the same as our authenticated user's username. So if we find a user, let's just go ahead and return back that user. Otherwise, we need to create the user. So let's return dispatch create user, and the ID will be username. The email will be attributes.email, and we'll also pass in a created at of date.now. And let's go ahead and save that, and that should do it for our user module. Okay, now we're going to hook this find or create user action within our authentication flow to find or create a user profile anytime a user logs in. So let's go ahead and dive into our auth store. Let's find login. Here's login. All right, right underneath the commit, let's add in a couple lines, and let's do await dispatch user find or create user. Pass in the user that we get back from our sign-in call, and then let's tell Vuex to run this off of the root. Okay, and then while we're here, let's also try to find a user anytime the application loads. So let's find our load, and then underneath the commit again, let's do if we get back a user from our currently authenticated user. Let's await dispatch user get user, and let's use user.username, and then tell Vuex to run off the root again. And let's save that. Okay, so at this point, we're good to go ahead and make sure everything is working okay. So we should be able to register a new user, and upon registration, we should get a profile created for them. So let's go ahead and register. Let's pass in an email, and remember, we're registering, so we need to use an email that we actually have access to so that we can get the confirmation code. And let's register. And then we should get a confirmation code coming through here. And let's go ahead and confirm, and we should see. Okay, so it looks like we were logged in okay, but we still got an error down here. So let's inspect this really quick. So the variable's input contains a field name created at with a capital T. That needs to be a lowercase t. So let's go ahead and find where that is. This is going to be in our user store module, and yep, right there, lowercase t. Let's give that a save, go back through the flow. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this again. So let's do okay, let's get our confirmation code, log in, and it looks like we got back no errors this time. So this last post request should be our create user. Yep, and there it is. And you can see we're actually getting back our user from that create user response. So far it looks like that's working okay. Let's go ahead and test our log out. So we should have an old profile from earlier lessons. So let's go ahead and try to log in with those if you happen to remember it. Hopefully this is correct. Let's try to log in, check out the last one. And yep, looks like that worked okay too. Lastly, we should be persisting our user within our Vuex store whenever we refresh. So here's our current user from our login. Let's refresh. The load should kick off to get our user, and that should be loading inside of our Vuex store again. So yep, there we go. All good. Okay, now before we move from authentication changes, later on we're going to be using our user's ID for privilege checking. So let's take a moment here to expand our auth helper class with an ID getter. So let's dive into plugins, auth, and then just right here, let's do get ID if not this user. So if we don't have a user, let's just return to prevent an error from occurring. Otherwise, let's return this username and go ahead and give that a save. Okay, now that we have the authentication bits out of the way, we can move on to setting up and handling our posts. So to get started, let's expand the API store that we created earlier in this lesson. So let's go to store API. Okay, and then first and foremost, let's go ahead and put in our default state data. So we're gonna have posts as an empty array, and we're gonna have post as null. Next, let's go ahead and move into our post CRUD actions. So to start out with, let's go ahead and put some space in between this and our helpers. Okay, so to start out with, let's do async list posts and make sure it doesn't extend off of GQL queries there. And then let's use dispatch, and then let's return dispatch query from our helpers. We're going to pass in a key of posts, and we'll want to run the query list posts. And thanks to our helpers, that's all that we need for list posts. So for the most part, the remainder are going to be the same type of structure. So let's just copy and paste this 4 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4. The first is going to be get post, and that will accept in an ID, and that will run get instead of query, and that will alter post within our state instead of posts, and then we'll run get post query on that one, and then we need to pass the ID in as well. Okay, the second copy, we need to change from list post to create post, and that will accept in an input. And then these 3 here are going to run mutate instead of query. So copy and paste this down here. And then the key will change to post. The query will change to create post, and we'll pass an input on that. Update post will be very similar to create post. So input, we got mutate, that will change post instead of posts, and it will run update post, and we'll pass in our input. Oh, we need to change that to update post instead of list post, and this one we need to change to delete post. And this one will accept in an ID, and that will not mutate anything, so we can get rid of the key there. And then the mutation we'll want to run is delete post, and for input, we're going to want to manually pass in an object of that ID. And then these 3 here, where it says query, we're going to want to change that to mutation. So also do that. So boom, boom, and boom. All right, and that should do it for our CRUD post action. So let's go ahead and give that a save. So now we have everything that we need in order to communicate with our API for application. So let's go ahead and start working on our views. So to start with, let's add the ability to create a post. So let's do pages, new file, and let's do posts create.view. And I'm just going to quickly stub out a view component here, so bear with me. Okay, so we just got a basic form page here. We got a H1 with our title on it. We got a title, summary, and body fields, and then we got a submit button. So let's start by expanding our data states. So let's do form, and let's have our title, summary, and body all set to empty strings. And then let's rig that up to our inputs. So v model form.title, summary, v model form.summary, and then body v model form.body. Okay, next up, let's create our create method. So create const post equals await this store dispatch API create post, and then we'll have another method called get payload here, and then let's On successful post creation, push the user back to the home page. And we can wrap that in a try catch as well. And just console log out any errors should we get any. Okay, and then for our get payload, let's return and spread out our form. To duplicate it, let's add in author ID of this auth user. Nope, we can actually just do ID since we added that in. And then let's do created at, and let's do date now. Okay, and then lastly, we need to rig that action up to our form submission. So at submit prevent equals create. I'm having a hard time typing right now. There we go. And give that a save. Let's pop into our browser and let's go test that out. So let's go to posts create. Okay, let's open up our console so that we can see if we get any errors out. So title, this is a test post summary. Just testing. It should really be a text area, but oh well. All right, create. All right, looks like that went off okay. We got a response back of our create post. So all is looking good so far. Okay, so next up, as we create posts, we need the ability to list posts so that we can actually see them. So let's just alter our home page here. So let's dive into index. Underneath our auth views here, let's just go ahead and add in another div. And this is where we'll house our list of posts. Let's go ahead and load our posts into our state using async data. So async data. Let's use the store from this. And let's return posts await store dispatch API list posts. And then for our methods, let's also just go ahead and add in the ability to delete while we're here. So delete post, let's accept an ID of the post we want to delete. Await this store dispatch API delete post, and then we'll pass in that ID to that call. And then let's also refresh our posts once we delete them. So this store dispatch API list posts to update our list of posts. Okay, and now that we have our post data actually loaded into our component state, let's go ahead and list those out. So v4 equals post in posts, a key of post.id, and then let's just go ahead and do a margin y of 6 on those. Do an h4. Text large, font semi-bold. Let's have a Nuxt link here. And then we'll just do posts and then post ID to dig in and actually view that singular post. And that will just be post title. Let's do a P here for the summary. So post summary. Okay, and then let's go ahead and do small here for our author. So small by post, and then we'll just list out the email here. Not really practical, but it'll do for now. And then let's do our edit and delete buttons here. So v-if post author ID equals the authenticated user's ID. Let's show that, and then let's do class of flex. We'll just justify those center, and we'll make those text extra small. So the first one's going to be a Nuxt link to, and then we'll create our edit page here in a moment. So posts, this will be post ID, edit, class of margin right 3, and just call it edit. And then we'll have a button for this one, and we'll rig that up to our delete post method. So delete post, post ID, class of text red 500, and delete. Okay, we should be good to test this now. Let's see real quick. That should be author, not auth. Let's go ahead and save that. Jump back into our browser. Looks like that put us on an error page. So let's go ahead and refresh. And yep, there we go. We got our list of posts, which is singular at this point. So while we're here, let's go ahead and add in a create post button. If a user is authenticated, then they should be able to create a post. So under our authenticated here, let's add in a Nuxt link to posts create class button green create post. So now we should be able to get to that page a little bit easier there. Yep. Okay, now while we're here, let's go ahead and create a post to test the delete. So delete post, just do delete. And I can't spell, but that works for me. We'll be deleting it. Okay, and delete. And it looked like it got rid of both of them. Let's refresh. And nope, we still got the one. So let's see what's going on here. We're not awaiting, so that we're setting this post to a promise. So let's go ahead and set a wait there. Save that, refresh, and go into create posts. And let's do this again. So delete me. Delete and delete, create it. Okay, and delete again. And there we go, that looks better. Okay, next up, let's go ahead and do viewing a post. So if we were to click on this title, it should kick us into a page where we view just that post. So inside of our posts directory, let's create a new file and let's do _ID, which in Nuxt land serves as a route parameter. So within our URL, this ID will very literally be the post's ID. And then let's do index.view inside of there. And then I'm gonna quickly stub out another view component here, so bear with me. Okay, so we have a basic show page here. We got a back button to go back to the home page. We got a H1, which will put the title in, a P for the summary, and a P for the body. So let's go ahead and fetch our data. So async data store, and then we'll use params to get the ID of the post we want to fetch, which thanks to Nuxt will be represented by this _ID whenever it comes time to our routing. So let's return post await store dispatch API get post params.id. And now within our data state, we should have access to our posts. So we should just be able to do post title, post summary, and post body. Go ahead and save that. And let's give that a test. So let's come back into our browser, click on this is a test post, and you can see we got this is a test post, our summary and our body, and we can go back to the home page. Okay, and then finally we need to be able to edit our posts. So let's go ahead and create a page for that. So within our _ID route param, let's go ahead and create a new file called edit.view. You could also adjust the create.view to handle creating and editing, but for separation of concerns and ease of reading through, we're going to create a separate page for this. Okay, and then this page is going to be fairly similar to our create page, so I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste in from the create page here. Any references of create, we'll just do update. So title will change to update, and then we'll have the post in here. So we can do post title to put the title that we're updating there. Create will change to update. And then down here, create will change to update. And then we're going to need to get our post data. So async data, store, and then params again. And then we'll do const post equals await store dispatch API get post params.id. And we'll return back our post and a default state for our form. So let's do title as post.title, summary as post.summary, and body as post.body. Okay, and then our create method will change to update. So update there, create post changes to update post, and we'll leave the rest of that the same. And then down here at get payload, we're no longer going to need the author or created at. Those will already be defined. However, we will need the ID for the post to mutate. So this post ID. Okay, and I think that should do it for editing. So let's go ahead and give that a save, jump back into our browser, and let's give it a go. So edit, looks like everything populated in the form. Okay, let's go ahead and just put edit right there, just to test to make sure it's actually sending through. Let's click update, and we got this is a test post edit. So it looks like that's working okay. Okay, and then finally, before we wrap up, let's test our access controls and make sure that they're working okay. So in order to fully do this, we're going to need to set up an admin group and assign at least one user to that admin group. So let's jump into the AWS Management Console and traverse to Cognito. Let's go into user pools. Let's find our project, and then let's go into users and groups, and then the groups tab, and click create group. And for the name, let's set this to admin, and we should be good to just go ahead and create that. Okay, jump back over into users. Let's find a user. Looks like we are mutating this one here. So I'm just going to copy and paste the email here. Add to group, admin, add to group. So they should now have administrative privileges. And you can see right here, groups, admin. And if we need to remove them, we can just click on that little X button right there. Let's jump back into our application. Let's log out. Let's log in. Let's paste in that email address of the user we made an admin and log in as them. If we can get the password right. There we go. So we can see here that our ID checking is working. However, since we're an admin, we should be seeing those edit and delete buttons. However, we didn't set that up within our views yet. So let's go ahead and check out our state to see what we need to do that. So let's dive into our auth user. Let's dive into the sign in user session. Let's check out the access token and the payload for the access token. And then we need to go to Cognito groups, and you can see admin is there. So we need to dig all the way down here to check whether or not the currently authenticated user has the Cognito group of admin. And a great place to do this is within our auth plugin. Okay, and then right here, let's do get is admin. And let's first check to see whether or not the user is authenticated. So if not user, let's just return to prevent an error. Otherwise, let's get the groups that the user has. So const groups equals this user, sign in user session, access token, payload, and then the next key uses a colon, so we're going to need to use a string here. So Cognito groups, and now we have the groups loaded in here. So now it's important to note here that if a user doesn't have any groups, this is going to be null. It's not going to be an array like our current admin has. So let's return whether there is any groups, and groups.includes admin. Let's go ahead and save that, jump back into our index page. Okay, so post author ID equals auth ID or auth is admin. And let's go ahead and give that a save. Let's jump back into our browser here, and we can see we now have edit and delete options here. So let's go ahead and click on edit, and you can see everything's loading in okay. Okay, so we don't have any middleware in place, so theoretically anybody should be able to reach this page. What really matters is that we should be able to edit. So let's go ahead and take the edit out, update, and it looks like everything went okay there. Next up, we should be able to delete this post out as an administrator, and it looks like that worked okay. So next up, we need to verify that non-admins don't have access to do that stuff. So let's go ahead and remove the administrative access from this user, and let's recreate another post. So we'll just use this user to create a post out. So this is another testing, test body, create that. Okay, let's log out, and then let's log in as a different user. So one that did not have administrative access at all. Okay, and they don't see the edit or delete icons, so we're just gonna need to kind of force the hand on this one. So let's dive into our post, and let's attach edit to the end of this. All right, and let's try to edit this post. So update, and you can see we got back an error. So that did not work at all. So let's go back to the home page now. So let's empty out the URL there. And then let's forcibly show the delete button. So let's just get rid of this VIF, save that, and let's attempt to delete. And you can see we got an error there, and it actually bombed the application because we don't have a try catch in place. So despite our try catch not being in place and us not gracefully handling that error, it looks like everything's working okay so far. So that should do it for this lesson. We skipped over updating and deleting the user's profile. However, the process is nearly identical to what we did for our post. So that will serve as something good for you to walk through on your own. And should you have any issues, I'm here to help. So in the next lesson, we'll be covering how to deploy our application.